All right, so let's go ahead and jump in here and talk about writing and reading numeric data. Okay, so if we know that when we're writing, it's always writing in strings and it's messing around with strings and everything strings, right? I have I love dogs, I love cats, I love horses, butterflies. When I write and I append, it's always writing it to a string, right? So what ends up happening if I have an integer or a float value that I need to write into a file? Well, because we know that the write function requires a string as the input, you're going to have to convert your number into a string before it can be written to a file. Same thing goes on the other side, right? If you're reading values out of a file that are integers or floats, you're going to have to convert them using the int and the float functions to be able to have those understood as numbers. Okay, so numbers must be converted to strings before they're written. You use the str or the string function. It converts the value to the string. And then when you're reading, they're read from the file as strings. So you have to convert them again using the int and the float functions to convert those back. So let's go ahead and mess around with writing some of these things. All right, so we have this file open here. So we have open equals io.txt equals r. So we have that in read mode. So let's go ahead and just append some numbers in here. Okay, so we're just going to have a length equals 12. We're going to have a height equals 15. Okay, so these are obviously integers. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and just write these in. We're going to use f.write. Okay, and we're going to say what values we want to be written in there. So let's go ahead and write in length. Okay, now in order for this to work, you're going to see it throwing an error because it's saying, hey, wait a second, length is an integer. I need that to be a string, right? Expected type string, and it's not, it's an int. Okay, so in order to make that work, I need to use the str function. Okay, so I'm going to just sort of encase this length in string. So I've converted it to a string, and now I want to go ahead and add a new line at the end. Okay, so we want to make sure that it actually goes down bit by bit. So again, f.write, we are going to convert height to a string, okay, and then we are going to go ahead and add a new line. Now when we run this, we should see this file, and actually let's go ahead and overwrite it. So we're going to go back to W and we're going to overwrite all the data. So we should just have a file that has 12 and 15 when we run this. So here we go. Let's go ahead and run it. All right, looks like it ran great. Now we have 12 and 15. Okay, so if I'm to read this back in now, the numbers are going to be read in as strings. Okay, so let's go ahead and mess around with just the read. All right, so let's go ahead and print f.readLine. And the thing that we're going to do is we're also going to do this rstrip just so I can expose you to that. Rstrip is going to pull off that new line at the end. And the print function itself will give it a new line. Okay, so they'll still be on different lines. f.readLine, and then we're going to do our strip there. All right, so we should see 12 and a 15. Okay, so here we go. Oh, and it says it's not readable. Obviously, we haven't changed the mode, so let's go back to read. Here we go. Let's run it. All right, so we actually didn't print anything. So let's see what is going on here. Oh, and the reason why we didn't print anything is what did I just do? I just ran it in write mode and overrode everything. So let's try that again. Let's go ahead and Control Z back to it. So you guys are going to do the same thing. And when you do, don't worry about it. It's a very common occurrence. Okay, so we're going to write this back in. All right, so there is io.txt. We have 12 and 15. I'm glad that happens so you can see that even the best of us do it. So here's 12 and 15. So now what we want to do is we want to get it off of write, and we want to move that into read, and then we want to go ahead and mess around with reading that in. Okay, so f.readLine. Oops, not r.readLine. f.readLine. All right, and then rstrip, because that's going to be a string, and let's throw that in a print function. There we go, and then we're going to do this twice because we know we have 2 lines. So there we go. Okay, now that I've fixed that problem, and again, you understand why the W is such a terrible, horrible thing, right? Well, it's not horrible, it's fantastic, but you just have to be really, really careful with it because it can override everything with nothing, absolutely nothing, which is what we just did. So this time, we have 12 and 15 in our io.txt. I have it in read mode, and we should see a read line and an rstrip. Here we go. All right, so we have 12 and 15. Fantastic. Now, what I want you to do, I'm going to introduce a new function to you. It's called the type function. Okay, the type function just tells you what kind of a thing it is. Okay, so we're going to go type, oops, not tripe, type, and then we're going to enclose this whole thing in. Now, obviously, you know what this should return. Okay, because we know that the print function takes a string and the print function isn't throwing any errors. We know the readline function returns a string and the rstrip only works on a string and we're not getting any errors. So we should see the type of a string, right? Because we're not having any issues with any of these functions that require strings. But I want you to be able to understand that you can use this type function, and the type function just looks like this. Okay, you can use this type function to determine what in the world you have. Okay, and you'll notice this is a class string. Okay, so we have two strings here. So if we want to be able to actually consider those strings as numbers, we're going to go ahead and have to convert those. Now we want those to be integers, right? So we can convert that to an integer right there. Whoops, it added it. And we can convert this one to an integer as well. And then we can come out here, eliminate this function call, and we can call this height. We can call this length, and we can go ahead and get rid of these in parentheses from that print function. We can recover the length and height that we wrote in there. So now I can actually print length, oops, and height. No problem. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if I can get that out there. All right, 12 and 15, 12 and 15. Okay, so I read the line in, got rid of the new line, converted it to an integer, and then saved it into a variable. Okay, now that's kind of complicated, but as long as you understand what's happening on each of these. Okay, so we have io.txt, we're reading it in, we create a file object that gives us access to the readline function. We call, using dot notation, f.readline, which returns a string. And then we use the string object function called rstrip, which pulls off the new line. And then we convert all of that, because that's going to return a string. We're going to convert all of that into an integer. Okay, so now we have an integer at this point, and we're going to save that into length. And we're going to do the same thing with height. Now, one thing I want you to see, since we've converted that, let's go ahead and use this type, sorry, not int, use the type function, and let's look at what type the length is, right? Length and height both should return int, right? So let's go ahead and hit that. All right, so we have an integer there now as well. Same thing with print. We should have a type and height, and we should see that it's also an int. Okay, so now we've read those digits back. These are both strings. We've read them in. We stripped off the new line. We converted it to an integer. And now we have those saved in variables that we can mess around with. Those, and both of those variables are integers. Now, if I wanted to convert those to floats, I could do float. And now you'll see that we have converted those to float. Okay, 12.0, 15.0. Okay. Now, this is extremely important in data because we're doing Python, learning Python for data analytics. Okay, when we're doing data analytics, reading and writing to files are extremely, extremely important. And usually what we're reading and writing to files are numeric data. Okay, so if you're going to be using a ton of numeric data and writing these to files, you need to understand that you need to be able to convert those strings, which is just a string of characters, into integers and floats to be able to actually process those, to find means, standard deviations, and errors, and all, if you're doing linear regression, or if you're doing data analytics, or if you're, whatever you're trying to accomplish, you need those to be numbers that you can do math on, okay? And in order to get that to happen, you're going to have to remember to convert the string to a float. And again, at the same time, if you're writing data to a file, say you're writing to a CSV or a TXT, whatever that might be, you need to convert those into strings because those things expect strings. So the f.write file, the .write function or the method requires a string, and the readline and read method return a string. Okay, so when you're dealing with files, you're dealing with strings, and you need to make sure that you really, really remember that. Okay, so that's sort of how that works and how you're going to be reading and writing numeric data. All right, so as you probably deduced already, we can't just do this read line over and over and over and over and over and over again until we've hit the right number, right? That's not a very intuitive way because especially if we're dealing with data, we're adding records over and over and over again. And our data set may have 1 million and it may not have 1 million. It may have 20 million. It may have 1 trillion. I don't know. So I don't want to be writing f.readline a trillion times, and I don't want to be adding it in every time a record gets added. I want it to be dynamic. I don't want to have to code that in. So the way that we can do that is using loops to process the files. Now, there's a way to do it with both a while and a for loop. And I'm going to show you the while loop first, and I'll show you the for loop second. Generally, we're going to use the for loop because the while loop it's the same thing, but it's a little bit harder. Okay, so with a while loop, so again, files typically hold large amounts of data, and we're going to want to loop over those large amounts of data. So a loop typically involved in reading from and writing to a file, right? We don't want to just do f.readline over and over again. We don't have to do f.write over and over and over again. We want to be able to loop through a data set, loop through a list, loop through whatever that might be, dynamically, so that it can just adapt to how long that thing is, okay? So often the number of items stored in a file might be unknown, okay? So if I have a giant file and I have a list, and I don't know exactly how long that is, then we're going to have to be using the while loop. Okay, so the readline method uses an empty string as a sentinel when the end of the file is reached. So whenever you hit an empty string, that means you've reached the end of the file. Now, this is an issue if your file has empty strings in it, and I'll show you that error and that headache here shortly. Okay, so let's go ahead and write this while loop and mess around with that. So we can write a while loop with the condition while line is not equal to, empty. All right, so we have this thing open. Let's go ahead and add a bunch of other things. Bunch of other arbitrary values that mean nothing, but they give us something to work with. Okay. All right. So that is what our file is. Okay. So we have this thing opened, and we have it open in read mode. Okay. So what we're going to want to do to start this while loop out is we want to have something that the while loop can look at. Okay. And now they used in this they use the line. Okay. So we can just do that as well. So line equals f.readline. All right, so now we have the line there. Whoops, and I accidentally hit enter. Okay, so this line will read the very first line. Now the very first line we know isn't empty, so it should have some value in it. So now I can go while line is not equal to just an empty string, I can actually print line. Now I have to change line, otherwise this would be an infinite loop, correct? All right, so then I go line equals f.readline. Whoops, not read. There we go. Okay, so just taking you through this. We open this up as a file object. We use the readline function to return a string into the variable line. While line is not equal an empty string, because we know this is not an empty string, and even if it was an empty string, it just wouldn't enter into the while loop. But because it's not going to be an empty string, while line is not equal to an empty string, we're going to print the line, and then we're going to update the line. We're going to read the next line, okay? And then once we go through this, once we find the empty string, which is at the very end of this, then we're going to go ahead and close it out, okay? So just to show you that we're going to jump out of the while loop, let's do a print statement, and we'll say end of file. All right, so let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. And there you go, 12, 15, 56, 89, 78, 98, 12, 13. Now again, there's an extra new line, because the print function is adding a new line, and we have a new line at the end of the read line. Okay, so we could do rstrip as well, which we'll go ahead and do that, and get rid of that new line. And there you go. Now we get to the end of the file. Let's make sure we're getting all the way to the end. 12 and 13, 12 and 13, we're hitting the end of that file. Okay, so when I don't know how long the file is, then we can go ahead and use that while loop. So, it's a really great way to just sort of access all the data in a nuanced sort of way. Now, the way that we're generally going to work with this data is we're going to go ahead and use a list, and then we're going to add this data to a list, and then we can go do our data analysis from that list, and we can just leave the file alone until we're ready to actually add stuff to it. Okay, so there's the while loop on how to sort of read out your file. All right, looks like we are at time, so we're going to go ahead and take a little bit of a break, and we're going to head over to the next video. I would encourage you to open PyCharm, mess around with this before you jump into the next video, and make sure you're feeling kind of comfortable with the lingo, how it's working, the syntax, all the concepts, everything that's underneath this, because this, especially with data analytics, this file stuff is extremely important.